it's remarkable what's available through video. Just based on object identification, vector and space analysis, and if you have a thermal camera as well, being able to identify quite a lot of information that was maybe always available. We just never really did much with it.
Hello and welcome back to another Coffee with Mr. IoT. My name is Robert Schmidt. I'm Deloitte's Chief IoT Technologist, and my guest today is Bobby Shkolnikov. Hey, before I even give them your title, how did I do in your last name?
That was worse than when we practiced. A little bit worse than when we practiced.
Shkolnikov.
There we go. Yeah, I admire you giving it a shot. It's not an easy one.
Well, and here's the part that's so bad about this is you and I worked together for like 4 years, but that's the thing with first names. We just introduce each other by first name. So, Bobby, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. You actually left Deloitte and you're now a principal at SAS. You are responsible for the business development for commercialization globally. Tell us a little bit about your new role. I am curious, what's your new role? And I'm sure everybody else wants to hear it too. And then after that, let's talk a little bit about being at Deloitte and not being at Deloitte.
Yeah, absolutely. So my new role is pretty fun. I get to do some pretty cool stuff. So our focus in the IoT Commercial Group is on building an ecosystem of partners to be able to co-create and co-sell solutions. So working with a variety of different partners to bring to market our products packaged up with a variety of different services and go-to-market and sales collateral layered on top of it to bring the outcomes that our business users need.
So help me and help our viewers. When I think of SAS, I think of data warehouses, I think of dashboards. I don't necessarily think of it in terms of IoT, but that's obviously not true. So just enlighten me, just give me some of the, update me on why IoT is such an important aspect for SAS now. What do you do there and what do you do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the group, the company is 44 years young. It is the largest privately held software company in the world. We've got about 15,000 folks dedicated primarily to analytics and artificial intelligence. So that is the bread and butter of what we're working on. The IoT group got created about a couple of years ago, and we've got a separate R&D group, engineers, enablement, marketing, sales, et cetera, to be able to operate almost as a sovereign group within SaaS. And the purpose for that is because our leadership was wise enough to look ahead and realize that in the IoT space, the companies that are most successful, they're not going to market with products, they're going to markets with solutions and offerings. And the IoT group was specifically created to bring to market, those solutions and offerings. And so I live in the Durham area, which is about 20 minutes from the SAS campus. One of the cool ways that I actually got to hear about the company for the first time was when I was doing my internship, my MBA internship at Google in Mountain View, and there was like a Friday dinners where the two founders, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, would talk about a variety of different topics. That time they happened to be speaking about how Google originated, how the Google Plus came to be, what they were doing when they were moving out of the garage and starting to build their campus in the first place. And they actually referenced SAS as a place they visited to gain an inspiration, because at that time, SAS was one of the only organizations that had this immersive campus, that had childcare, that had physicians on staff, that had food on campus. Kind of all the things you come to associate with big tech didn't exist back then, but did exist in Cary, North Carolina, on the SAS campus. So that was one of the first cool experiences. I'm like, oh yeah, I've heard about SAS. It's about 25 minutes from us.
So campus today. Tell us, when did you leave Deloitte?
Yeah, so I left in February or end of January and started in the beginning of February.
So did you get to go on campus, or was it just after lockdown?
No, I got to spend, thankfully, about a month and a half there before things started getting crazy. So I got to experience some of the good stuff and more importantly, got to meet some of my colleagues face to face.
What happens with the campus today? Have you been there since?
Yeah. So I actually got my flu shot last week over there on campus, just again, using the on-site facilities, but it's pretty empty. It's a lot of buildings, a lot of unused space. Now, granted, there's folks that are coming in as long as they're following protocols, but the majority of people are still working remotely.
I have to ask you, one of the things, so you know this, right? I worked for Deloitte and then I left, went into industry and came back. And one of the most, I don't even know how to describe it, but one of the most surreal experiences for me was working in industry, being assigned an office. And, I put my picture of my family down. And I was like, whoa, there's like this really surreal experiences to have an office. Do you get an office that you're not going to right now?
Yes, I have an office that I'm not going to right now. And yeah, it definitely is. It's kind of
How did that feel?
It felt very surreal. It's a time when, you kind of, we're not really used to planning routes in a conference room at a client side. So being able to sit down and realizing I don't have to take all of my stuff home with me every night was kind of odd and also pretty nice. It took me a few weeks to actually realize, hey, I can bring pictures of my family here. That's okay. That's acceptable.
It's an interesting, different thing. And, it's actually interesting. We think about this. I thought about this really recently now, right? I think all of us spend a lot of time in our home offices. I like my home office, except when I find myself cluttered, I sort of like slowly move stuff around. More and more stuff ends up on my desk until I clean it up again. But it's going to be curious to see what the new normal is going to be, right? When are we going to travel again? Bill Gates just said he thinks business travel is going to continue to stay 50% lower than it ever was. So we'll see. So Bobby, let's just shift gears and talk a little bit about, I'm curious to talk a little bit about some super interesting new use cases that you've experienced with SaaS, some stuff that you actually saw before Deloitte, but now you see more, sort of like that shift, kind of like, what do you see now that you didn't see before? What do you see more of? What do you see less of?
Yeah, one of the cool use cases that I definitely saw when I was at Deloitte, but I'm seeing a lot more of now, is just around computer vision, visual inspection. Being able to, and what's amazing here is I've always thought about having to use very highly specialized equipment, cameras, to be able to derive the perfect image from, of in particular, like a medical device. And what I'm learning is that we can do a lot with not really the highest quality image. And that's pretty insightful. And then the other part that I'm seeing is not so much tied to a particular use case, but more tied to the notion of scale. And that's where, even when I was at Deloitte, noticed customers and clients struggling kind of to bridge the gap between running the proof of values and pilots and then actually deploying them into wider scale implementation. And what I'm seeing now is I think that there is more of a macro trend where more and more customers have explored a variety of different IoT use cases. And a lot of them have played around with them, been successful in some pilots, but have been stuck in the sort of pilot purgatory, where they're doing pilot after pilot after pilot, but having challenges with scaling them, both scaling them out and scaling them up. And what I mean by that is, the scaling out is a kind of a pretty common application of this, going from an asset to a series of assets to a production line to a plant to a series of plants. The scale up piece is a little bit different, and that's about building in the intelligence into a use case. So if we're going to use predictive maintenance as an example, when we deploy it initially, it's not really a predictive model. We're deploying this. We set thresholds. When thresholds get exceeded, we get an alert. So it's kind of more of a condition-based monitoring system. Over time, there's contextualized data gets created. We start moving towards more of a hypothesis-based predictive model. And then once that gets hardened, then only then do we start getting to a predictive model. So that kind of scale up on the intelligence of a use case is a very interesting part. And I think this is where I've seen some clients struggle, where there's a misalignment between how they scale up and scale out a use case. For certain things, you don't really require a great deal of intelligence into a use case before you can go ahead and start scaling this out to a series of production lines. For other use cases, it might require more and more intelligence just because it's such a painful piece. And I think managing both the scale up and scale out components is where we're seeing a lot of clients kind of scratching their heads.
So, you have an interesting shift from Deloitte to SaaS, which is, when you were at Deloitte, we mostly work with US clients. I mean, we're a global firm, but a lot of the work we did was US based. Now you have a global role. What do you see outside the US that you feel is different from what you see inside the US? Are there particular places of the world that are more advanced that you look towards? Are there other places that you find there's great opportunity to move into? I'm always curious to talk to people who spend more time globally than I spend, particularly with my background being European. I always find that fascinating.
Yeah, well, the one thing I've learned is folks tend to speak a few more languages than we do here in the States.
Okay.
And that's always impressive. But another thing is, one of the cool things about the role that I'm in is I get to work with a wide array of partners. SaaS recently announced a major partnership with Microsoft, who is a behemoth. And at the same time, I'm also working with a small company called The Grain out of Belgium, who are domain experts on the shop floor. They've done quite a bit of work with SaaS before. And what I'm seeing there is that the level of automation and progress in kind of the Benelux, the Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and the Nordics is pretty impressive. In a lot of cases, can be somewhat ahead of what I saw at least a couple of years back when I was, at a variety of different manufacturing facilities and in the States.
Interesting. So I'm curious to go back to what you talked about, the video part. So you said that video, you saw a lot more video analytics and analysis based on that, and you were fascinated by how simple cameras can be to do that. Actually, one of my favorite sort of lines is, if I can see it, the computer can see it. And I think that's very true kind of nowadays. What do you see people do in what industries? Do you have particular examples where you saw a company use it that was fascinating? Because I love to sort of like have the concrete example, not just video, but sort of like video where, what product, what line, what was it?
Yeah, no, one of the cool examples was just around back to the factory type initiatives, using simple security cameras to ensure that one of our clients, a plant manufacturer that creates rowing equipment, ensuring that their folks on a production line stay socially distanced from one another. And if they don't, to identify when that happens, to be able to adjust and kind of change behavior in such a way. At the same time, to also ensure that folks are keeping their PPE on, whether it's mask or gloves. That's also another fascinating piece. And honestly, it's the same technology that got applied to schools to be able to ensure that kids at middle and high schools are staying somewhat socially distanced from one another. And again, that's as you can imagine, it's a very challenging task to get a bunch of kids to stay aligned to the CDC guidelines.
Well, I can only imagine that they even move faster, right? In a factory, you might have actually people stand and still and be in certain spaces for more than 60 seconds. With kids in schoolyards, that's probably not the case. So very interesting. It's really true, actually, because I remember we had conversations and people came to me to talk about Bluetooth trackers on your arm and, those kind of things. And it was like, yeah, it's possible. And people do that, except, you actually have to have a track on everyone then. And you generate a whole lot more data versus video is a much, much easier way to do that. Have you seen some of those also around temperature tracking? I've seen people use thermal cameras to track temperature. Seen those examples too?
Yeah. It's remarkable what's available through video. Just based on object identification, vector and space analysis, and if you have a thermal camera as well, being able to identify quite a lot of information that would, was maybe always available. We just never really did much with it. And I think it's always a lot easier for organizations when they can reuse existing equipment. They don't have to ask for changes in behavior by asking people to wear a certain device, to procure that device, connect it to some system, and then what happens when the batteries die or somebody's not wearing it. No, instead we have, there's cameras that are already been in place. We're just scaling up in terms of how we're using them.
I have to ask you one question about the whole video thing, because I'm sure some people go right there. It took me a while actually to think about this, because it's not one of my major things, but what about facial recognition? So the reason I thought of this is, so now you have people that hanging out close together, and now you want to know, is that okay? Because, in a family business, it might even be a family group that hangs out close together, and that might be okay. Do you actually then do this by person, or do you just actually observe behavior and then actually take that behavior observation to action? So what happens with this? Is this by person, or is this just by group?
Yeah, in the use cases we've done, I think purposely wanted to stay somewhat away from identifying individual people. Is more around, hey, in this sub-assembly within a production line, this is where a lot of issues occur. So let's go ahead and see what time those occurred rather than tying them to a particular individual, just because I think we have to be cognizant with privacy concerns.
Got it. So you stayed away from that. That makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. So I want to shift a little bit of topic, if that's okay with you. I wanted to talk to you. You've been a consultant, and now you work for a corporation. You and I actually had a really, what I thought were a great conversation right before you left. You and I talked about, what's different, what shall I expect, and so forth. You've been now there almost a year. Tell me a little bit, what's your experience been? What are the things you found that you may be missing, but what are the things you found that you really enjoy beside having your own office that you can't go to?
Yeah. Love the office. Love the office that I have. I know that it's clean, because that's kind of how I left it. No, one of the things I enjoy, and it's the same thing that I enjoyed at Deloitte, was working with high performing teams. And I've been fortunate enough to have done that when I was at Deloitte, and I'm fortunate enough to experience this now with SAS. I love the persistence of working in industry, working at SAS, meaning that I'm working with the same teams, the same folks. I get to see projects through completion. The relationships I make and develop are the ones that are going to stay with me, on a day-to-day. There is no such thing as, okay, like in 8 weeks, once this project is done, a lot of these folks I might not see again. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's the part I enjoy. The part that I miss about Deloitte is, and I think it's also reflective of our new world, the fact that we're separated from one another. But I miss being in a conference room with a group of folks trying to resolve a pretty urgent and important matter in a short period of time, and the camaraderie that comes together from it.
Do you think the pace is different? And I say that in a good and a bad way, right? I think sometimes the fast pace really wears me out, and sometimes I also find the slow pace actually gives you the opportunity to go deeper in certain things. I don't know. What do you find? Is there a difference? Is it the same?
Yeah, I think the pace is different, for sure. And I remember we had a critical deliverable that we needed to have for one of our senior executives. And I got so many apologies for having to kind of put something together at 6 p.m., which is just different from the inherent nature of consulting, where a lot of times that's expected. And I agree. I think what it does is allows me to be a little bit more selective and go deeper into certain things, to dive a little bit deeper into something rather than be forced around delivery or turning around the deck or ensuring that everything is perfect within a deliverable, because our brand is on the line and the client is paying us a ton of money to do this. So the perception is such a big thing. Here, it's not that the perception isn't important. It's that, I think how you package something is a little bit less important than the content behind it, which is a nice change.
Yeah, I see that. Let me close with a question that we're gonna see if you're willing to answer, but I'm very curious. You've been inside and now you're outside Deloitte, so you have a unique perspective looking outside in. Any recommendations you have for me as someone at Deloitte? Anything you'd suggest for me? Anything that I could do differently now that you've seen us from the outside in?
Oh, of course. I would love to answer that. Well, I think it's always the struggle for leadership at Deloitte. The struggle is between kind of the all-stars in a project, the folks that are really rocking it, and how do we ensure that they're continuing to develop and getting the opportunities across a variety of different roles, functions, accounts, with compare that against the needs of the project. There's a reason they're all stars, and losing those folks or moving them away for a particular project hurts the project. And I think that's a consistent balance that leadership is forced to deal with. How do we make sure that we're giving our top performers the flexibility to continue to grow and develop and experience different roles, while at the same time not negatively impact the particular project they're on by rolling them off. So I think figuring out ways to manage that better.
What's the recommendation?
I
agree with you with the problem, by the way, but I think the problem exists anywhere, really. You always have the high performers who want to do something exciting. So I don't really know this is any different. I've always had that problem with the best people. What do you recommend?
I recommend siding with the folks and giving them more opportunities. That's something that I got to experience a little with some of my counselees as I became a manager at Deloitte, and helping them figure out how to navigate their career, their path. So I like taking that kind of the longer term aspect of how do we help them grow? How do we enable them to be successful in other roles, even if it comes at initial pain point on the project, because now we're rolling them off.
So you're
it's
saying
easier said than done.
What I'm hearing you say is that we actually side with the client before we side with our high performers, is what you're saying. It's easier to do that. Is that what you're saying?
I think it depends. I was fortunate enough where I got a ton of different opportunities. For me, both.
But it's a hard choice.
But it's a hard choice. I got a ton of different opportunities. I've seen other folks that didn't get the same opportunities. I think I ended up having a much more enjoyable career and probably much longer career at Deloitte than some of the other folks that ended up leaving earlier because they felt locked in.
Interesting. Well, Bobby, it's great to see you again. It's great to catch up. I'm glad that we remain in contact. I appreciate this. You reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've watched your coffee chats, and I'm so glad to have you on one now." So, anything we missed? Anything to close? Any closing thoughts?
It's awesome to go from being kind of a consumer of this to helping contribute to us. So, thank you for having me on. Always fun to connect, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, same thing here. Love to continue chatting, and I'm always welcoming your customers on my show too. So any great case, please let me know, and we'll take it from there. And with that, we have another coffee chat coming to an end. Thank you for watching. If you missed any of today's or previous shows, check out our playlist on YouTube or your favorite podcasts. And I'd say till next time, stay safe and healthy. Thank you so much. Bye.